Hi guys, and welcome to yet another exciting session on cybersecurity. So my name is Nakul Shah, and I would like to welcome all of you all on behalf of Edureka to this brief webinar on cybersecurity and penetration testing. Before we start with the curriculum, let me just give you a brief overview of some house rules that will help us interact with each other better. So let's proceed forward. Before we get deeper into the session, let me just quickly walk you through the topics that we will be discussing today. So we'll begin our discussion by understanding what penetration testing exactly means. So what is the meaning of penetration testing, how it came into being, and what is its importance. Then we'll get an understanding of the different phases involved in penetration testing. Moving on, we'll check out different penetration testing types as well as the various tools which are available for penetration testing in order to assist the cybersecurity experts to do their job correctly. And finally, we'll end the session by talking about some of the famous penetration testing tools, including Metasploit, and that's how we'll be concluding today's session. All right, so let's proceed forward and let's get started. Now, what is penetration testing? So penetration testing has become an intricate part of a comprehensive security program. The basic idea or the fundamental of penetration testing is to simulate an attack on a system or an IT infrastructure, which is termed as penetration testing or pen testing. And by doing this, you're basically exposing the weakness on your core attack vectors, the operating systems or the network devices, and basically the entire application software. So this is what penetration testing ideally is. The idea is basically to explore and find weaknesses before the attackers explore the same. And this has become more important than ever in today's world with all these DDoS attacks and phishing attacks, ransomware demands, and other techniques used by cyber attackers, and in generally various other attacks used by sophisticated cyber criminals. So, in today's world, people say that a lot of theft is done through the internet and through the computer as compared to the traditional means of location based or physical theft. So that is where most of the attacks are happening, and penetration testing is basically the best defense against these things, because the best defense starts with knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. So that is what penetration testing exploits and makes the stakeholders aware of the same. Pen testing, it provides intelligence and insights into how to mature your security organization by understanding how you could be and likely will be attacked, and the steps you should take in order to prevent these kind of attacks. However, pen tests, they are not created equal. So pen tests do not come in one size fits all kind of a package. If you simply Google pen tests, you are likely to find an assortment of companies offering to conduct inexpensive, fast tests geared to help meet either certain PCI requirements or some other compliance standard that a company might have. But pen test, it has to be more than just about checking a box in your documents or in your product lifecycle. They really need to be a critical a starting point to improve cyber defense. Also, one important thing to remember is that vulnerability assessments, they are not called pen tests. Vulnerability assessments, they provide a prioritized list of vulnerabilities and how to remediate them. But a quality pen test needs to have a goal in mind, whether that is to hack into a specific system, breach into a database, or probe uh, uh, as a hacker would to find a hackable system. So those are good pen tests, and pen tests, they are conducted by ethical hackers to mimic the steps of real hackers. So a quality pen test should give you deep insights into organizations' overall security postures, and more importantly, how to prioritize the vulnerabilities found in the test and eliminate them to improve the organization's security. So these things are very, very important when you're getting into the entire world of pen testing. Also, do remember that there are certain restrictions in regards to penetration testing. So you cannot go ahead and start penetration testing or start this process on anyone's application. You need to acquire the right permissions, their consent, etc., before you can touch anyone's application and try to pen test them or try to breach them. So that is very important. Do not try these pen testing techniques or schemes on any application that you feel like. So that because there are certain restrictions around that. So just be mindful about these things. All right, so moving forward, now let's talk about the vulnerabilities. You can find the essence of technology everywhere today. And as businesses, they increase their dependency on information technology, which includes cloud, IoT devices, mobile devices, social media, uh, and other such technologies, the cyber risk, it continues to rise, and this rise is happening at an alarming rate in today's world. So every day you hear about cyber attackers hacking into computer systems, servers, stealing everything from passwords to financial information, KYC documentation, etc. But the main question is that how are they doing all these things? And the answer is simple. Cyber criminals generally make use of loopholes present in the computer systems or the networks or the applications to get what they actually want. And these loopholes, they are nothing but vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities, they could be due to several different reasons. So let's first take a look at what these reasons could be. What are the potential reasons out here? The first reason is pertaining to design and implementation. So, a flaw in the design and implementation of the hardware and the software that can put a business at critical data, the business and the data that that business holds at a critical risk of exposure. Also, the poor system configuration. It's another cause of these kind of hacks and another major vulnerability. So if the system is poorly configured, then it can introduce loopholes through which attackers can enter into the system, and these attackers can then steal the information in matters of a few minutes or maybe even seconds, depending on what kind of system it is. Also, an insecure network could be a potential risk. So you could be using an insecure network, making it easy for cyber criminals to actually come in and attack your system and manipulate data or steal data from that particular system. Next, even system complexity sometimes becomes a problem, a major issue, because the more complex the architecture of computer system gets, the more chances are that the system can be attacked and the system can have loopholes. So as a rule of thumb, you should keep the systems as simple as possible. Of course, when you're developing much more evolved applications, it cannot always be done, but as far as possible, you can try to keep it a little simple. The next one is human errors. So human errors like improper disposal of sensitive documents or coding pertaining issues or insider threats or sharing your passwords with others. All these can also lead to security breaches. The good news over here is that there is a way in which the company can find out all these security weaknesses and loopholes, or if not all, at least a few of them, which are present in the computer systems or the networks or the applications before the cyber criminals can. And this can be accomplished through the process which we are now learning about, which is called as penetration testing, or simply known as pen testing. All right. So penetration testing, in simple terms, is the art of finding these vulnerabilities that we discussed earlier and digging deep to find out how much a target can be compromised in case of a legitimate attack. So we will think about this in a way, in a particular way. Like if I were to draw an analogy, consider this like a bank hiring someone to dress as a burglar and try to break into the building and gain access to the vault. So if the burglar succeeds and gets into the bank will gain valuable information about how to tighten their security measures, what were the loopholes, what were the steps that the burglar took to actually get to the vault, and accordingly they can tighten those issues, they can tighten those vulnerabilities. Similarly, the primary purpose of penetration testing is to identify any weak spots or vulnerabilities in systems defenses which attackers could take advantage of. Apart from this, the other reason of penetration testing, it includes to measure the compliance of organization security policy, to test the staff's awareness about security issues, and overall, in order to determine whether and how the organization would respond to security disasters. So I hope by now you all have a basic idea about what penetration testing is. So let's move forward with certain different phases which the penetration testing covers. So now, now we will be discussing the actual process which is followed by penetration testers or penetration testing agencies. And penetration testing can actually be broken down into multiple phases, and these phases vary depending on the organization and the type of test which you're trying to conduct. But we will discuss about different types of penetration testings later. So like I said, penetration testing is mainly broken into 5 phases. Now, let me give an overview and then we'll start discussing each layer or each phase in further detail. All right, so this is basically an overview of the penetration testing phases. Now, penetration tester, he usually begins by gathering as much information about the target as he can, and then he identifies the possible vulnerabilities in the system by scanning, after which he launches an attack. Once the attack has been done, once the exploitation has been completed, he will sit and analyze each of these vulnerabilities and the risk involved. And finally, the pen tester will detail everything down in a report and submit the same to higher authorities, summarizing the result of the pen test which was conducted. So, like I said, 5 important phases, and now we will go ahead and discuss each of these phases in further detail. Now, the first phase of penetration testing is called the planning phase. So in this phase, the attacker gathers as much information about the target as possible. And the information, it can be different data points like IP addresses or domain details or mail servers, the overall network topology, etc., etc. So basically, he also decides in this step on the type of system which are considered to be a target, the types of methods that you should use on a target, and other such related information. So this is one of the very important step, the first step, and here the pen tester or the agency who's doing this, they literally plan everything what they have to do during the actual pen test. And now, once the planning phase is complete, the pen testers move on to the second phase, which is the scanning phase. So, in the scanning phase, the attacker, he will interact with the target with the aim to identify the various loopholes or the weak points which are present on the system or the network or the application that he's testing. So basically, this phase, it includes the scanning of the network with various scanning tools, identification of open shared drives, open FTP portals, and services that are running, and any kind of information that he can get his hands on. So in this case, if it's a web application, the scanning part can be either dynamic or it could be static. So in static scanning, the aim is to identify the vulnerability functions, libraries, and logic which is implemented. And if they're going ahead with the dynamic analysis, then the tester will pass various inputs to the application while the application is running, and he'll try to record the responses. So there are these different ways in which he could run the entire scanning phase. And it's more practical way of scanning when compared to static scanning. So dynamic scanning is it's much more practical. All right, so moving on to the next phase, which is the execution phase. Now, this is another crucial phase that has to be performed with due care and diligence, because this is the step where the actual damage is done. It requires special skills and techniques used to launch an attack on the target system. And using these techniques, an attacker will try to get data, or he'll try to compromise the system or launch a DOS attack, etc., to check as to what extent the computer system or the application or the network it can be compromised in a legitimate attack. So when if an actual attack happens, to what extent will the system be compromised? And basically, this is the phase where the actual attack is being done by the ethical hacker. So the ethical hackers goal is not to actually cheat the system, but to get all these data points. But he does it with the intent as if he was actually trying to get hold of the data, so that he can basically simulate how the real attacker, how the attacker with a malice intention would treat the system during this kind of a legitimate attack. Once the attack has taken place, the next phase, or the post-attack phase, is something called as the analysis phase. So once the penetration testing is complete, the final aim is to collect the evidence of exploited vulnerabilities and then report the same to executive management for review and later action. Well, sometime in this step, a penetration tester, he also provides some useful information or any kind of recommendations that he feels are essential to implement in order to improve the security levels. And apart from this, like I said, he might have discovered different kinds of vulnerabilities and risks which are involved with these systems. So he basically categorizes all those risks, as in he specifies if the risk is critical or high or medium or low. And thus he informs about the effect of all these vulnerabilities, and which ones are the most critical for the system. And accordingly, he presents a detailed report to the management. So normally in a detailed course, you will learn more about these categories of risks, and how you can see these categories, how you can analyze those categories. So those things are explained, especially when some demos and all are conducted. But for today's session, we won't be getting there. We'll just be briefly talking about these different categories of risks that exist. Now, once the analysis phase is over, the final phase is called the output phase. This is the last phase associated with the penetration testing. And this is another important phase in the whole process, because in this step, the results of penetration tests, they're compiled into a detailed report. And this report usually has the recommendations which are identified in the previous phase, previous phase as well, which is the analysis phase. And specific vulnerabilities that are discovered and the risk level of the entire process is all jotted down in this particular report. So basically, this phase, it usually has a summary of the entire pen test conducted, and this entire report is collated with all the required details and handed it over to the senior management or the stakeholders. So this is the usual procedure that all kind of penetration testers or agencies they normally follow, and with some changes here and there, in order to perform penetration testing. So, like I said, these phases they usually vary depending on organization and type of penetration tests that they are conducting. But the overview of penetration testing, it does involve these phases to some extent. All right, so now we talk about some of the penetration testing types. So there are different types of penetration testing that are available, and you can categorize penetration testing based on different strategies that you have in mind. So let's start taking a look at these different types of penetration testing. Now, let's begin by the basic one over here. So, first to begin with, we have the network penetration testing. Now, it usually aims at discovering weaknesses and loopholes which are related to network infrastructure of an organization. Basically, it involves firewall configuration or bypass testing, stateful analysis testing, the DNS attacks, and many other similar kind of test case scenarios. And some of the most common software packages which are examined in this test include Secure Shell, which is your SSH. Then you can also have your SQL Server, MySQL, and SMTP protocol, which is nothing but your simple mail transfer protocols. Then there is also FTP, your file transfer protocol. So these are the things that get analyzed in this particular phase. And basically all the software packages, they are checked for any kind of loopholes or any weak point that can be that can help a real hacker get into the system. And then the next one that we have is your web application penetration testing. So in an application penetration testing, you usually check if there is any loophole or vulnerabilities which are present in the web-based application. So usually the core components of applications such as ActiveX, Silverlight, Java applets, and APIs, these are the things that are examined in this particular phase or in this type of penetration testing. The next kind of penetration testing, or the next uh, application which goes through penetration testing, is the wireless penetration testing. Uh, and as the name implies, this test basically involves examining all the wireless devices which are used in an incorporation or in a company or an organization. So these devices, they can be anything like notebooks, smartphones, laptops, etc. And basically, this test, it will spot the weak points in terms of wireless access point or admin credentials and wireless protocols, and report those things to the to the security managers so that appropriate actions can be taken. The fourth one in the list of penetration testing types is social engineering. So this is a unique kind of penetration testing. So this type of test basically involves attempting to get confidential or very sensitive information by purposely tricking an employee of an organization. So, like, well, if you have two subsets here. Now, first, there can be remote testing, wherein you are checking an employee to reveal sensitive information via an electronic means. So that electronic means, it could be an email or an SMS or any information that you're sending to them without you having to be in real contact with them, and then getting their credentials or valuable information through these emails and SMS. So usually you get those phishing emails or calls in order to coerce you to divulge sensitive information. So that is what this remote testing involves. And then there is physical testing. So this basically involves the use of physical means to gather sensitive information, like convincing them in person, or some kind of sample threats, or any kind of physical uh, uh, physical way in which you can coerce someone to divulge sensitive information. And that's the reason it's called physical testing. This is basically the social engineering part, both remote and physical testing. And the last one that we have is the client-side penetration testing. So basically, this testing, it aims to search and exploit vulnerabilities in client-side software program. For example, web browsers that you use, such as IE or Chrome or Firefox and all that. So it is possible that there might be certain vulnerabilities present in the application as well. And so basically in this, the client-side penetration testing, it tries to find out these vulnerabilities present in the use of a certain application with a particular web browser or software package. And accordingly, a decision can be made in order to either make certain upgrades or block the application from being used on a particular browser. So these are some types of penetration testing that are available in the market. These are some types which are very common, which cover most of the penetration testing activities that are out there. In regards to the types of penetration testing, there's one more way of categorizing it. So we've seen one way of categorizing it earlier based on the platform that you're using. The other way of categorizing them is based on knowledge of target, and second is based on the possession of penetration tester. So, as I said, based on how much information a penetration tester knows, we have three kinds of penetration testing. One is the black box penetration testing, the gray box, and the white box. So, let's begin with the white box. When a penetration tester he is given complete knowledge of the target or of the application, it is called as white box penetration test. The attacker here, he usually has knowledge of either the IP addresses which control the place, or the different kinds of components of an application, or some code snippets and samples, etc., which he uses in order to break into the application or the network and figure out certain vulnerabilities and exploit them. The next one is black box testing. So when the attacker has absolutely no knowledge of the target, it's referred to as black box penetration test. And that's basically what black box is in simple terms. So with zero knowledge, with no knowledge at all, he has to go and break into the product. And finally, when the tester has some partial information about the target, we refer to it as the gray box penetration testing. And in this case, the attacker, he has some knowledge of the target, like some URLs or IP addresses, but he does not have complete knowledge or access. So while this is respective of type of knowledge that penetration tester process he has to do before he performs the test. So basically, what I mean is that in this gray box testing, he has to the company, they have to provide him with certain partial knowledge which they feel it might be out in the public as well. So either their IP addresses or their URLs, if they are out in the public, then any other hacker can also have that information, and in that case they need to provide that information to their pen tester as well, to make sure that he can utilize that information to go ahead and attack the system. Now, when we talk about the penetration testing strategies, so based on the position of the pen tester, there are different types of pen tests which are available. We have already discussed network penetration testing, application penetration testing, and many others. But apart from this, there is something called as external penetration testing as well. So if the penetration testing is conducted from outside the network of an organization, it's referred to as an external penetration testing. This test, it usually targets the assets of a company that are visible on the internet. For example, you have your web application itself, or the company websites, their emails, their domain name servers, etc. And the exactly opposite to the external testing, we have something called as the internal testing as well. So if the attacker is present inside the network simulation of the scenario then that kind of a scenario is referred to as an internal penetration testing. A very simple example would be an employee whose credentials they were stolen due to some kind of a phishing attack, and even though he might not be aware of this attack, but still he is part of the organization. So it is from inside the organization, and that's why it's called as internal penetration testing. Then we also have something called as the targeted testing. It's performed by organizations IT team and penetration testing team who are working in tandem, so who are working together. The next thing you have is the blind test. In the blind test, the attacker is given limited information prior to the test, and using that limited information, he has to go in and attack the system. And finally, we have the double blind test. And as the name suggests, it takes the blind test and carries it a step forward. So in this type of pen test, at maximum, only one or two people within an organization will have knowledge that a penetration test is happening. So, and that's the reason it's called as double blind test. Now, these are basically different ways in which you can categorize your pen test. Now we will discuss the various tools that can be used that actually come to the picture. So let's talk about the tools that a pen tester can use to reduce his burden and conduct the test more effectively. First of all, let's discuss why do we actually need these tools. Well, obviously, they save a lot of time and effort. So tools will identify this loophole or these vulnerabilities much faster, and that will help you work on the next phases or the next stages, which are more critical. And also, these tools, they are quite accurate if used properly in regards to their findings. And a penetration tester cannot it's not practical to assume that a penetration tester is an expert in all the phases. So he can use these different kinds of tools to perform advanced analysis in each of the phase and make sure all the phases have been executed correctly. So now these tools, they can gather a lot of information as well, and they can use this information to report it to the tester much more easily as compared to the tester doing everything by himself. And this data, it's usually used by internal teams to create strong architectures or report to the senior management about the security flaws. And lastly, the final advantage of using these tools is that these tools, they automate a lot of manual tasks. So the teams, they can focus on skilled work or things which require their attention rather than redundant operations or redundant tasks which take up a lot of time. So if I have to summarize in a single step, these penetration testing tools, they make conducting a penetration test easy for the tester and ensure a comprehensive test with detailed reports and analysis. Now, when we talk about these tools, so there are a lot of popular penetration testing tools that are available in the market, and a lot of them they are free as well. Some are open source softwares, and some are paid tools too. So some of the widely used tools available in the market, they include the Nessus. So Nessus is it's a network or web application scanner, and it can perform different types of scans and help a penetration tester identify the vulnerabilities present in that network. The next you have is Metasploit. So Metasploit, it's an exploitation framework that has been packed with various capabilities. For a skilled attacker, he can use it to generate payloads, shell codes, gain access, and perform privilege escalation attacks on any application using Metasploit. The next one is Nmap. It is another very popular tool. It's basically short for network mapper, and it is a port scanner that scans systems and networks for vulnerabilities which are present in open boots and Finally, we also have something called as the Wireshark. So Wireshark is Wireshark and OpenSSL as well. These are other alternate tools that are available for testing different aspects of your application. So at this point, you must know that penetration testing is it has different phases involved in performing a penetration test and different types of penetration testing that we have seen. We've also seen the different categories of penetration tests, and finally, we took a look at some of the tools which are used to perform this penetration test successfully. So this was, the high level of what penetration testing and cybersecurity is. Now, out of these different tools, one of the most commonly used tool for penetration testing is called Metasploit. And when we talk about Metasploit, so the reason that tool is so common is because it's one of the most advanced tools available in the market. If you want to get started with Metasploit, you can simply Google Metasploit, and you can find the tool, the Metasploit framework available. It can easily be downloaded from the platform. It's a computer security project that provides information about security vulnerabilities and aids in penetration testing. So you can just click on it, and basically it's an open source project owned by a security company called Rapid7. Um, uh, uh, which basically licenses full featured versions of Metasploit software. It's a great tool if you know how to use it properly. And the skilled attacker, he can, as I mentioned earlier, he can generate payloads, shell codes, he can gain access and perform privilege escalation attacks by use of these tools. And as you can see, there are different ways you can access Metasploit. So there's something called as the arbitrage. Where did it go? I think I'm on the wrong link over here. So I don't see arbitrage over here. Basically, arbitrage, it's the fantastic Java-based graphical user interface for Metasploit framework that you can use, and it's a command line way of accessing Metasploit. So if you want to use it on Windows, there's also a download option available over here. You can simply download it and make it available for yourself. If you they have some a free version as well, and if you want certain advanced features, extra features, then you can go for the Metasploit Pro and get access to those features. Now, if you want to know what these extra features are, you can simply follow the links and you can learn more about those features once you have a good understanding of cybersecurity. Now, before you move forward in this world of cybersecurity, as I had mentioned earlier as well, a minor warning to you guys that do not try performing penetration testing on any application that you feel is vulnerable or any network which are available out there. It's not allowed to do that. And there are separate softwares and applications which are created especially to experiment in order to learn these different pen testing tools. So if you want to perform a web application penetration testing or a penetration testing in general, you need to set up an environment. And for that, you can download a virtual machine. It's called the Kali Linux. It's a virtual operating system to perform penetration testing. So you can just search Kali Linux, and you can go ahead and use that. So it's spelled this way, Kali Linux. Basically, this Kali Linux, it's a virtual operating system which contains different, actually, I think so it's 600 plus tools to perform penetration testing, and 4 and 6 in cybersecurity or ethical hacking. So, like if you want to use Kali Linux, you can simply go to their link, and under downloads here also you'll find the different versions that are available for you to download. So based on your computer and your operating system, you can get the 64 or 32-bit version. And if you're using VMware or virtualization software like VirtualBox, then you have a separate image for that as well. So while Kali Linux installation process is about 7 to 8 minutes, it's not a lengthy process. But if you want to know from step one to the last step, it's better that you download some ISO image depending on the operating system that you're using. But if you want to just avoid all that, and if you want to just use the image, you can go ahead and download this image for a VirtualBox or a VMware as well. Again, depending on the kind of operating system that you're using. So those are, the different options that are available in order to learn these things. Of course, the detailed course talks more about cybersecurity and the various processes that you can follow. But this is just at a high level. One more thing is that we need some sort of vulnerable application or server to actually perform penetration testing. So for that, you can use something called as the Metasploitable. There is some, if you just Google Metasploitable, you can find that, and you can make use of that to take a look at, how you can run your Metasploit tool on that particular application. So these are, some high-level concepts, some high-level things around penetration testing. This is what penetration testing is all about. Now, some of the questions that I usually get in regards to penetration testing or cybersecurity, the first thing is that how often should you perform these penetration testing? So organizations, they should perform penetration testing regularly. That's a rule of thumb. And if you ask me an ideal time period, I would say maybe once a year to ensure more consistent network security and IT management. But in addition to conducting regulatory mandated analysis and assessments, penetration tests, they can also be run under certain situations. So suppose you've added a new network infrastructure or application, then it's good to run a penetration test. Or if you made a significant upgrade or modification to your applications or infrastructure, you can run a penetration test. Or if you establish new offices in new locations, then penetration testing can be run. This also applies to security patches that have been lodged, or if there is some end user policies that have been modified, then these kind of penetration testing can be triggered once again. However, because penetration testing, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a one size fits all kind of a thing. Thus, when a company it engages in penetration testing, it has to, it also depends on the various factors associated with it. So not every company can do it so frequently, and depending on the kind of company, the frequency of penetration testing also changes. For instance, if the size of the company, if it's very large or it has a major online presence, then it is more prone to attack vectors or hackers, and therefore they are more attractive targets. And in that case, they need to do penetration testing more often. Also, penetration tests, they can be costly. So a company with a smaller budget might not be able to conduct them annually. And an organization with a smaller budget might only be able to conduct a penetration test once every 2 years, while a company with a larger budget can also do it once a year or twice a year too. So it really depends on what kind of budgets, what kind of pockets you're dealing with. Also, sometimes there are regulatory and compliance related issues around penetration testing. So organizations in certain industries or in certain geographies, they might be required by law to conduct penetration testing as well. And in that case, they actually have to go ahead and do it based on the schedule provided to them. Also, a company whose infrastructure is in the cloud, they might not be allowed to test the cloud provider's infrastructure. However, the provider may be conducting pen tests for himself, which can be leveraged by the company too, at least the fruits of that kind of pen test. And penetration testing efforts, they are, as I mentioned, they are quite tailored to the individual organization as well as the industry it operates in, and should include follow-up and evaluation tasks so that the vulnerabilities found in the latest pen tests, at least they can be reduced or they can be prevented in the future tests that are conducted. Also, when we talk about these penetration testing tools that we just discussed, often like pen testers, they often use automated tools to uncover standard application vulnerabilities, and penetration tools, they can scan the code in order to identify certain malicious code in applications that could result in a security breach or data hack, etc. Pen testing tools, they also examine data encryption techniques and can identify hard-coded values such as usernames and passwords to verify security vulnerabilities in the system. So, like if you have to choose a pen testing tool, some of the things that you should keep in mind is that it should be easy to deploy, configure, and use these kind of tools. They should be capable of scanning the system fairly easily, and they should always categorize vulnerabilities based on severity. So, not all vulnerabilities they require immediate attention, and especially if an organization has a limited budget or limited time, then it's very important that these vulnerabilities, they are categorized by severity. And the tools, it should also be capable of automating the verification of past vulnerabilities, so that you don't have to recode that again and again. And all past exploits or vulnerabilities, they will automatically get verified once again. And finally, these tools, they should be able to generate good detailed reports and logs about the entire process. So you can always reverse engineer them and you can review them at a later date. Also, one important aspect of any penetration testing program is defining the scope within which the pen testers must operate. Usually, the scope defines what systems or locations or techniques and tools can be used in penetration tests. And limiting the scope of the penetration test, it basically helps focus team members and the defenders on the system over which the organization has control. So that's very important. For example, if a penetration testers, they gain access to a system because an employee left a password in plain sight, that reveals bad security practices on the part of the employee, but it gives the pen testing team no insight into the security of the application as a whole, which was actually compromised over here. So those are, some kind of things that you should always keep in mind when you're conducting these kind of pen tests. And this was a high-level overview, a brief overview about what penetration testing is, how it is utilized, what are the different types and categories, etc. And with that, we come to an end of today's session. All right, guys, thanks a lot. I'm signing out for today and wish you all a great rest of your day ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.